Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to a new episode of Chatting with Lady C. Hello, Mum, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, honey. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
People are going to think that we actually compare notes on how we get dressed.
Yeah.
They're going to think that we're like Mrs Thatcher and the Queen, you know, when Mrs Thatcher sent word to the palace to say that she was going to be wearing such and such a colour, ostensibly. The Queen says, I never notice what colour anybody has on. Because she doesn't colour coordinate for anybody. But I mean, we're colour coordinated again, and it's completely accidental.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing. Well, great minds think alike. But you know what they say? Fools seldom differ. What do you think we are?
Great minds. Right. So today we're going to start off again with Mum explaining about the series The Crown. So today we're going to be explaining episode 4 of The Crown, and I hope you enjoy. So it's all from you, Mum.
Okay, well, again, I have to say, superior entertainment, but my gosh, it's dangerous. And it's, you know, this is the sort of thing that can be fatal to a monarchy. It's certainly proving to be fatal to Camilla's reputation, and it's injurious to Charles's. And I think it's doing the royal family's reputation generally not much good. But superior entertainment and brilliantly done. I suppose if they're so good at lying, they might have even been good at telling the truth. And on that note, I will plunge in. Episode 4 really starts because with Mark Thatcher getting lost in the Dakar rally, the Paris to Dakar rally.
Yes.
I remember it very well. I remember when he got lost. I remember the tremendous, and through friends of mine in the government, I knew that Mrs Thatcher was beside herself, as any mother would be. In those days there weren't mobile phones. They had no idea where he was. He was in an area that covered thousands of miles. I mean, how do you spot that? And that they do very well in The Crown. They get across the tremendous distances that would have had to be covered to find him. Having said that, they then create great mischief by linking Mark Thatcher's loss to Mrs Thatcher's worry, which of course she was worried about, and to the Falklands invasion. But we'll get to that in a second. There's an excellent scene about favourite children. It's excellent theatrically. And really, Prince Philip is playing cat and mouse with the Queen. And, you know, about favourite children. And it's a really good scene theatrically. It is said that Prince Andrew is her favourite child, but she gets along very well with Princess Anne. And it is said that Princess Anne is his favourite child, but that he's very close as well to Prince Edward, who will one day be the Duke of Edinburgh, and who has done sterling work with the Duke of Edinburgh's awards scheme. So I just say what is said privately, and I suppose publicly as well. However, it is very irresponsible of the makers of The Crown to link the invasion of the Falkland Islands by Argentina with Mark Thatcher's disappearance, and to imply that Mrs Thatcher, being a concerned mother, had her eye off the ball and was therefore influenced adversely by her private worries with her lost son. The invasion took place months after he was found, and he wasn't lost for that long. It was a matter of days. I don't remember how long, maybe 5 or so. Still long enough for a parent to be climbing the walls, but still, it was. But it's very irresponsible of them, and it's also almost misogynistic, because there seems to be the implication that Mrs. Thatcher, being a woman, was distracted, but a man wouldn't have been distracted if his son was lost. I mean, that's a sort of underlying message which I find very discomforting. And I'm really surprised that people who are as woke as Peter Morgan and Robert Lacey can come up with something that is so politically incorrect, or maybe they slipped it in hoping that nobody would notice. Well, I've noticed, and I'm sure loads of other people have noticed as well. The underlying message in the series as well is that the Falkland Islands are somehow just a little bit away from Argentina, sort of like the Isle of Man with us. Mm-hmm. Well, that's utter rubbish. The Falkland Islands are a few miles short of 1,000 miles from Argentina. You know, if Argentina is entitled to the Falklands, I would respectfully suggest that Mexico is entitled to Texas and Arizona, and the Native Americans are entitled to all of the real estate that the imported Americans are benefiting from. And they just make the point that, you know, they need to be very careful when they play games with history and with fact and with geography. And they sort of push a sort of a woke agenda that's going to poke at everybody, really, who represents the old order in any way, shape or form. Because the Falkland Islanders are categoric about the fact they wish to remain British. They have had stability as a British territory. If they were an Argentine territory, they would have much less stability. But I suppose the makers of the crown talk out of one side of their mouth when they're speaking about various countries, and another side of their mouth when they're speaking about another country. So wildly inconsistent. I notice that Martin Charteris, who actually used to live in the Cundy Street flats. Do you remember the Cundy Street flats?
No, yes, no.
You don't really, or you do?
Not
vaguely?
Really.
Vaguely. Martin Charteris used to live in the Cundy Street flats. And so I used to see him quite a bit coming and going. Charming man, absolutely, really a nice man. He had been the provost of Eton after leaving the palace as the Queen's private secretary. I think it was in 1977 that he left the palace. This is now 1982. Martin Charteris has nothing to do with the palace, effectively. I mean, he was still on great terms with the royal family, etc., but she was often in Lochmore House seeing Mrs. Osborne King. So I just make that point for what it's worth. But so Martin Charteris, 5 years retired, is still in situ, so to speak. So that shows how they're playing with facts. I'm not quite sure the reason for it, because it doesn't really make theatrical sense, unless they're either ignorant or couldn't be bothered to hire another actor. Who knows? It doesn't really make sense. Then they have a really offensive scene about the Queen instructing him to ferret out personal details about her children, because she's now going to be interviewing each of her children to figure out which one is her favourite. I mean, I ask you, have you ever heard of anything quite so ridiculous in your life? I mean, wouldn't a mother know who her favourite was?
Yeah.
I mean, well, really, I mean, she'd have to be extremely disconnected from herself as well as her children to have no idea who her favourite was. And also, she needs personal details of the children because she's now going to interview each of them. And it's a theatrical device, but it is ludicrous. It is truly ludicrous. And it's really rather offensive. First child up is Edward. Edward comes in and he kisses his mother and he bows. He doesn't kiss hands, he bows. Completely incorrect. He doesn't bow, he kisses hands. There we go. First, and they repeat the error when Andrew comes in as well. Because when it's time for Andrew's interview, and of course they're very good at sketching the different characters of each of the children. So Edward, who's actually a really charming guy and pretty down to earth, and I mean a really nice person. They have him being a money-grubbing, arrogant sort of whiner. In fact, he was bullied very badly. But he ended up making a success of his stay at Gordonston nevertheless. And I'm very uncomfortable with the way he's characterized. It's unfair and it's unseemly. The next child up for the interview for the Queen to decide how much she likes her is Princess Anne. And it's a slightly more realistic and sympathetic scene. Because they're touching upon Princess Anne's marital problems, which did exist. And they then touch upon, in the series, Princess Anne's relationship with Peter Cross, who was her protection officer. And when the palace realized that they were rather closer friends than some people would have found acceptable, he was demoted, moved on, left the police force eventually, and he and Princess Anne continued seeing each other for a while, in fact until he remarried, because at the time he was married to wife number one, then wife number one and he got divorced, and then he married wife number two, and that's what brought that friendship to an end. But the characterization of the relationship between the Queen and Princess Anne is a gentler and a more sympathetic one. But still slightly sort of, I don't think they actually realize that the Queen and the royal family actually have feelings like anybody else. It's sort of like these are puppets and marionettes and walking, talking things things that look human but really aren't. It then shifts to Mrs. Thatcher with having dinner with Mark and Carol and Dennis. And Mrs. Thatcher's cooking dinner, which she used to do, serving dinner, which she used to do. I mean, so to that extent, it's true, because Mrs. Thatcher was a woman. She was a brilliant woman. She was a scientist, and then she was a politician. But she was a woman, and she used to say that being a woman gave her insight in a way that men didn't have. And she never lost her femininity. And one or two of my friends who were in her government said that she was extremely attractive and not exactly seductive, but captivating. And she was a good-looking woman, and she played upon it, you know. So I don't think that comes across particularly so far in the program. But what does come across is that she was a woman. It also, what comes across really screamingly loudly, is that she much rathered Mark to Carol. And then Carol is characterized. Now, I've only met Carol once or twice, but she is great friends with two of my greatest friends, one of whom is your godfather. And I know that when I've met her, that what I've seen is what you rarely get, that she's a really lovely, down-to-earth person. I mean, you most likely don't remember it, no. But when we were in Cloisters over Easter, she gave you children an Easter cake. I mean, she didn't need to do that. That was pure kindness on her part. You know, she's just a nice person. Mm. The Carol Thatcher that is portrayed in The Crown is not someone I recognise, and I don't think it's someone I'd like. And I just say that for what it's worth. There's a wonderful scene, an absolutely wonderful scene, of Mrs. Thatcher with her secretaries of state and ministers. And it shows how decisive she is, and she was decisive, and how she cut through the waffle. And there was an awful lot of waffle where Mrs. Thatcher was concerned, because you had the old, rather pink Tories who, like Harold Macmillan, Mrs. Thatcher's selling off the family silver. Well, Mrs. Thatcher is the one who stood up for the little man, who made it possible for the little man in this country to buy his house, to own his car, to buy his television set. She is the one who single-handedly, with much opposition from the right wing of the Tory party, and it has to be said, a lot of the men, on class grounds, because she wasn't aristocratic. Although, incidentally, somebody asked if it's true that Harry Cust was her mother's father. Harry Cust was Lady Diana Cooper's father. Harry Cust in the 19th century was a famous man about town who was always romancing any woman at all, whether it was the maid or the chatelaine. He would be right there trying to work his way into her bed. And there's always been a rumour that Harry Cust might have been Mrs. Thatcher's mother's father. Oh, how true it is, nobody knows. But certainly Mrs. Thatcher was not the provincial arriviste that she's being portrayed as being. As if it's not bad enough that they often get the truth of the characters wrong, because even though it's theatrically wonderful, the characterizations, even when they are theatrically true, are personally untrue. They even have details like Prince Andrew and the Queen are having lunch, and they are using salt and pepper on their food, and they don't even know how civilized people use salt and pepper. They have them using it completely incorrectly. I just say that for what it's worth. So, because there's no way that people's manners slip to the extent that they would do certain things. They just don't happen. Not a small detail, and I'm being really picky now. Something is different from something, and you go towards something. Something cannot be different to something. It has to be different from something. This is a grammatical error that they make time and again. I don't know where they went to school, but wherever they went to school, they weren't taught English properly. Then they have another splendid scene with Mrs. Thatcher in the cabinet meeting over the Falklands War. And it's beautifully done, and it's brilliantly done, and it really does capture the spirit of the woman and what she was up against. Because Mrs. Thatcher didn't only have enemies within her ranks, she had the Labour Party as enemies. And can you imagine the strength of character of this woman? But she was a conviction politician, and they are few and far between. And that was the secret of her success. And I have to say as well that while she was in power, she got on my nerves royally as well. So I can see why she got on people's nerves, because she had a very abrasive personality. But with the passage of time, I have come to realize the tremendous favor she did to this country. And I think it's sad that her abrasive personality is being used to color the results that we still benefit from as a result of her great powers of thought and great determination. There's a very good scene, and I'm sure it's pretty accurate in both tone and feeling, of Charles shouting to the pregnant Diana, who's locked herself in the room, because I know that Diana used to lock herself in the room, but Diana used to shout at Charles as well. I mean, on their honeymoon, everybody was absolutely horrified because she used to scream down the house, yes, leave me alone, go and be with mummy. You know, what am I supposed to do up here all day and you're off with mummy? But Charles, they used to scream at each other, and and that's a really good scene. But of course, I'm pretty sure they're not going to have Diana ever screaming at Charles. It's only going to be Charles screaming at Diana. because, of course, there's no way they're going to leaven that loaf and have a nice fair do. This scene takes place when the Queen is coming to interview Charles, and they do capture something of the divergence between the Queen's approach to life and personality and Prince Charles's. They rather cleverly indicate that Charles is a lot more self-indulgent than the Queen, which he is, and which is absolutely true, and which came from his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, because she's the one who used to indulge him and encouraged him in his self-indulgence. And there's this wonderful scene where he's showing the Queen his plans for the garden at Highgrove. And the Queen does make the point, rather pointedly, that, you know, it's Charles is saying the garden's going to be expressing himself and his interests and this, that, and the other. And the Queen does really sort of slightly say, yes, Charles, you really are rather self-obsessed, which is not entirely fair, but he is self-indulgent. But he's not really self-obsessed. He's more obsessed with his visions, and, you know, whether it's the vision of the garden or the vision of the Prince's Trust, which was his vision. Admittedly, he nabbed the idea from his father, but it was his vision, it's been his execution, and it's done wonderful work with poor young people throughout the country and indeed throughout the world. So I think we need to place it in its context and see that there were definite positive results from it as well. They do capture very well Charles's romantic side, though, and Charles's romantic notions of Highgrove. They do capture that rather well. They also capture rather well, I think, Charles's perplexity with Diana, because it wasn't only Charles, though. Everybody found Diana perplexing, but Diana found herself perplexing, and this is what is not coming across, and I suspect will not come across, because Diana didn't understand what was happening to her. You know, when your personality implodes the way hers did, and you develop serious issues like bulimia, and you are struggling to adjust to superstardom, you don't actually know what's going on either, would you? You know, you really wouldn't, and she didn't. But they captured Charles's perplexity, but it wasn't only Charles. I know from various royals that the Queen and Prince Philip used to scratch their heads thinking, what on earth can we do? How can we reach this girl? They wanted to reach her. I mean, you know, nobody enjoys seeing a member of their family floundering and suffering and falling to bits, and 1 minute she's perfectly happy, the next she's crying and she's hysterical, and the rapid mood changes that were a character, that were a feature of her personality. And they tried to get help for her, and Diana is on record as having said that the royal family called in endless psychologists, psychotherapists, and psychiatrists to try to help her. she didn't want help at that stage. Until she was ready for help, she fought it. So they don't show any of this. And this is the human side of Diana. This is the complexity of the story. This is the heart of the matter. This is also why, no matter to whom Diana was married at that time, she was not capable of a good personal relationship with anybody, because she didn't even have a good personal relationship with herself. And I just make that point for what it's worth. They then exaggerate the contact between Charles and Camilla. In 1982, Charles and Camilla had practically no contact whatsoever. They might find themselves in the same place, but they were scrupulous about keeping their distance, both privately and publicly. Charles was fully committed to his marriage, and Camilla was fully committed to Charles's marriage working, and anything else is both untrue and unfair, and it is mischief making of the highest order to make out that Charles and Camilla were sneaking around trying to get back together. They were not. And the sacrifice they made should be acknowledged. It really should. It's not fair to them. And what good does it do Diana? And Diana, I know, is the one who laid the foundation for this with her embroidery of what happened. And Diana did it partly because she was really worried that when she left Prince Charles, her children would be taken away from her the way she and the other children were taken away from their mother. And she was quite determined history would not repeat itself. And she truly believed that unless she made herself into Charles's victim and the victim of a cruel and unfeeling royal family, that this would happen. I was never of the view that it was ever going to happen. The Queen, Prince Philip and Prince Charles are too decent, and they are really too good as human beings for something like that to have ever happened. Philip also had a great deal of sympathy for Diana, because remember, he was brought up by a handicapped mother who had mental illnesses. He understood from personal experience how difficult it is not only to cope with somebody who is mentally ill, but for somebody who is mentally ill, for them to cope as well. He had a great deal of sympathy for his mother and a great deal of sympathy for Diana. None of this is being conveyed. None of the decency, none of the consideration, none of the nuances are being conveyed, which I think is a great pity. So to actually wrap up the point I'm making, I think I want to hammer it home. The characterization of the marriage is flawed, and the characterization of the Queen and Prince Philip's part in the marriage, and in them trying to help Diana and to help Charles as well, because they sympathized with both parties. None of this comes across, and this, I think, is a very great pity. Then they have the Queen expostulating about her reasons for having her two younger children, as if she is a yellow journalist on a gutter press newspaper. I mean, honestly, you know. then they have her effectively saying, I recognize I was an inadequate parent to my two elder children, but I'm going to get it right with my two younger children. Well, that's actually not what happened. And I know people who know the whole situation very well. One of whom was telling me the other day that she was at Fort Belvedere with the Dorneys, who in those days lived at Fort Belvedere. The Queen arrived with Prince Andrew, who was jumping on Sir Martin Gilliatt's back, and giddy up horsey, giddy up horsey, giddy up horsey, and having up and down, up and down. And the Queen thought it was very funny. And, oh, look at the wonderful time Andrew's having. And isn't Sir Martin wonderful to be allowing my darling Andrew to ride him like a horse, while everybody else was thinking, excuse me, you know, get that child off this poor man's back. But I can sympathise with the Queen because, as you will recall, when you children were very young, people used to say to me that I didn't have you under proper control and that you were wild. And I think it's what older mothers do with children. They're very indulgent. But the idea that the Queen feels or ever felt that she was an appalling mother to her two elder children, she wasn't. She did the best she could. And she had, you know, the crown to think of. And she just didn't have the time. And also what this crown, I do not think will have got across. I don't know that it hasn't got it across, but I'm pretty sure it hasn't, is the tremendous pressure that the Queen and Prince Philip and their marriage were put under by the courtiers and the politicians, as each group was trying to wrest control over her to the detriment of her well-being, her serenity, and their marriage. I bet none of that was actually portrayed. But they've managed to have the Queen on a guilt trip. And I think on that note, I'll say, hopefully this has been of interest to you. I will be doing the next episode very shortly. I know that several people have asked that I cover the whole series, and so I will. And I will say again, it's excellent entertainment. It's just not true.
Well, thank you, everybody, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share with your friends. Thank you very much, and goodbye.